Welcome into this week's episode of Three True Values Big Board. I'm your host, James Fletcher, alongside Derek Lewis once again as we break down the NBA offseason, what is coming for all these teams across the league. It's time for us to hit the Eastern Conference's Central Division. That's because, of course, the Cleveland Cavaliers lost in the Eastern playoffs. So that means all their teams are done. They can focus on the offseason. We have just three more of these division previews to do after this as we move towards the NBA draft. Of course, we have a game 7 coming here in the Western Conference. Next week, we will focus on the division in the West that has been eliminated. So, Derek, let's talk about this Central Division. We got to start here with the Chicago Bulls because they move up in the draft lottery. They get a top 4 pick, something that will really help them kickstart this as they move into a whole new era. Billy Donovan is out as the head coach. New front office is there, and Bryson Graham comes from the Atlanta Hawks, where he has started to help Ansi Sala build out a new framework. We'll see how that impacts what he does here. Of course, previously with the New Orleans Pelicans before that stint as an assistant guy. So we can kind of trace through what he's liked and try to apply it to this Bulls offseason. And I think the Bulls' next couple of years, as they try to dig themselves out of this kind of purgatory they found themselves in, where middle of the tier, not good enough to win in the playoffs, maybe a play-in team each year, you're going to have a meh pick. They've gotten a couple of pieces here. Josh Giddey, through a trade with the Oklahoma City Thunder, feels like a piece they can build out around at the point guard spot. Matas Buzelis is no doubt a hit for where he was drafted. What can he continue to develop into? You've got some real unknowns still. Rob Dillingham, Noah Essengay. We still haven't seen really anything to tell us if they can be productive pieces of a roster moving forward. And then you've got a lot of money coming off of the books. So with the Chicago Bulls, there's so much to unpack here. We need a coach. We need new stars. We need a draft pick. And we've got to go out in free agency and do something to fill out this roster, Derek. So where do you think is the most important thing to focus in on here?
It's so funny you started with the Bulls because when I do these trades, surprise trades, when I'm building this out, every division has had a theme. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just the narrative writer in me. But the first week it was, hey, we want Giannis. The second week it was, we all have vets that we don't need anymore, and we have no real space to trade people. What do we do? And this week it's just like it's just like we have a roster going to nowhere. That's the theme this week is we have a roster going nowhere, and no one encapsulates that more than Chicago Bulls. Obviously, the new regime doesn't have anything to do with that, so that's not on them. But for me, it was really hard to conceptualize what I think about this team because they don't know what they think about this team. Even if the last regime had stayed in place, I don't think they know what they wanted to do with this team. And it's just like it's less of a roster and a collection of basketball players.
Yeah.
Like that's all it is. And so like, I think we all think that they'll probably end up with Caleb Wilson. I'm really high on Caleb Wilson. That's a good piece to build around. But even that, I'm not sure how to conceptualize how to build around that without seeing what he's truly going to be on the NBA level. Because even I, as high as I am on him, don't really know what his strengths and weaknesses are going to be on the NBA level to formulate him as a superstar to build around. So I had a really hard time, and I'm just going to give you the spoiler right now. I refused to make a trade for this team because if you don't know what you're building, how can you expect for me to know what you're building? And that's kind of where I landed. The only thing I had on that subject is can they get off Patrick Williams, which I don't know if it's even possible, but that's the only thing in terms of their roster that I feel is kind of a pressing need in terms of like we need this to happen this offseason to kind of build around things is can we get off Patrick Williams? What will it take to get off Patrick Williams? But like I said, they're just a collection of basketball players with a lot of money opening up. What can they do with that money? And so I'm going to kick it right back to you.
Yeah, I think that the most important thing here is to nail the draft pick. I think that they falling to 4 makes that about as easy as it can be because you know that this is kind of considered a top 4. You're going to take whoever's left on the board and you're going to sell it as we got one of the top tier guys. And you're also not going to take the blame if that doesn't turn out to be the best of the 4 guys. Nobody's going to look at you 5 years from now and go, wow, you missed on that. No matter who you take at number 4, it's a stress-free pick. You take whoever falls there. Most expect it to be Caleb Wilson at this point. You get the added benefit when you take Caleb Wilson of building up some hype, some excitement. You can sell that some of these talking heads, they believe that he has the highest ceiling in this draft. So you can bring extra excitement in there to your franchise. And I think that Caleb Wilson also fits the mold of what Bryson Graham has gone after. It's strength, it's athleticism. You just look at the amount of wings, the amount of long, rangy guys who have all the physical tools in the world that his past teams have bet on. I think they're going to continue to do that here. And we will see in the coming years how he plays next to a Montas Buzelis, because I think that what you're really hoping is that those two, whether it's Buzelis at the 3 and Wilson at the 4, whether you move Wilson to the 3 and Buzelis plays more of the 4, whatever combo you play those two guys, you're hoping that those two can play off of each other and become a dominant force on the wing for you as you build out what is going to be the center spot. How do we get a shooting guard in the door? The things that you want to build around what is now going to be a 3-man core. You're committed to Josh Giddey, Matas Buzelis, and Caleb Wilson in this scenario where he's the guy who falls to number 4. From there, I think that they're kind of still in this weird no man's land. You've got to get a roster on the floor. Most of their free agents, I don't even think it's worth talking about whether they want to re-sign them, because it's Colin Sexton, it's Anthony Simons, Zach Collins, Nick Richards, Gershon Yabusele. Literally every single player I listed was part of a we're going to get off of things trade. These are guys who were just kind of thrown into Chicago as a temporary loading zone, like a gate at the airport. When you can't get off the plane, but you're going to kind of hang out in this city, you're not going to see the city at all. You're going to sit on a plane, but it's not your final destination. All these guys understood that they were going to spend a couple months in Chicago with no plans of being there long term. They don't need more guards on this roster. We already pointed out Josh Giddey is their point guard. Rob Dillingham is the young guy that they took a shot on at this trade deadline. So as we move forward, how do they fill this out? Going to be very interesting, because I think they're going to have enough space that they can get in the mix and try to get some of these restricted free agents, at least put offers on the table for them. But they don't feel like they're in a situation where they're going to be a desirable free agent landing spot. So you're going to have to outbid teams if you're going to get in the mix for free agents in that scenario. And to your point, Patrick Williams being the only real trade that would do anything meaningful to get off of his money, create even more space to go get these guys. Well, you're in the asset accumulation phase of this rebuild. You cannot afford to attach a first round pick, 2 first round picks to Patrick Williams in order to get off of that money. He's better served being on your roster and running down the time of that contract to an expiring deal until it comes off the books even, than you are to spend assets to create that little bit more money, those $18 million that his contract stands, and bring in another free agent in that path. So I think that they're, unfortunately for them, in a weird holding pattern. This is the start of the rebuild, and we're not going to get any meaningful progress forward until we see what we have on the court with that core 3 that we just talked about.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. They're going to be reactive. That's the point of the rebuild that they're in. This is what happens when you delay it for so long, is it forces you into this stalemate where you have to be reactive. You have to see, okay, where can I find some inefficiency? Can I grab it here? Similar to what Portland did. I brought this up 2 weeks ago with Denny. They said, hey, Washington doesn't value Denny. I can strike here. And that ended up being a good move. That was the point of the rebuild that they were in. Even the Spurs, when they took Harrison Barnes, they were reactive. They said the Kings were saying, hey, we don't want Harrison Barnes. The Spurs said, we can use Harrison Barnes and we'll get a pick for our troubles. I want to be clear. The reason that there isn't a trade for Patrick Williams that I came up with is because any old jerk can do hey, let's staple 2 first round picks to Patrick Williams and send them off. They shouldn't do that. Yeah. But if they can trick someone, or if they can fall into that old GM trap of we can fix them. Oh, I see the promise in Patrick Williams. If they can jump on something like that, I don't know that that's out there, because it's just such a bad contract. And I'm not even quite sure what Patrick Williams is good at.
Mhm.
It's like the worst scenario of like the Caleb Williams situation. Excuse me, the Caleb Wilson situation. It's like if that went horribly, horribly wrong. It's like I don't know what Patrick Williams can be useful for on a different roster, but if they can find the one person on earth, because they only need one, who feels that Patrick Williams has value, they need to strike on that. But like you've said, they just have to kind of wait and see and react to whatever the market gives them and make shrewd moves off that, which is totally possible and a decent position to actually be in if you can maximize it.
Yeah, you got to be reactive if you're the Bulls. And so the only other thing that there really is to talk about here is who should they target as a head coach? And I don't have a specific name in mind, but I do think if they can get in the mix for one of these young up and coming assistants, I think that's the direction they need to lean than going and trying to get an established guy. Yes, Billy Donovan was great to have there. His willingness to go through that last phase of their organization and try to make the most out of it, try to alter the way that he plays, kind of help these guys grow into better basketball players. But at this point, I think that the path that you want to take is the same one that the Hornets took. You want to get in a guy like Charles Lee, who everyone views very highly, who is understood to be a commanding presence, but doesn't have some kind of long history in his coaching resume where he's going to be worried about, I need to win now. I need you to get me the players now. Get in a young assistant who has shown all of the signs you need to become a great head coach, and then provide him the runway, the reassurance, the stability that you're going to see this through. You're going to get us to that next level as an organization, but we need you to first teach these guys how to be that level of player, how to be that level of team. That's your first goal. Then we can focus on whether you can win playoff games or not.
You mentioned this guy in a past episode. I'm wondering if you think he's played himself out of this type of a job. Is this a Tiago Splitter landing spot?
I think it definitely could be. He is one of the targets that I'm most interested in. Um, Obviously, Micah Nori is another guy with the Timberwolves who I think honestly might be in a little bit too high of a tier, along with Sean Sweeney on that Spurs staff. Those are two guys who, yes, they're assistants, but I feel like they've almost separated themselves a little bit into the next tier of guys who are the in demand next guy on the bench, the top assistant. I think they can go into probably a little bit better situation than this. But like I said, I could have done a deeper dive and found all the names out there. There's definitely plenty young coaches who are really solid and fit that Charles Lee mold. You just got to go out and find them, interview them, and figure out which one has the game plan and the blueprint that matches yours as a front office.
Yeah, last thing for me on the just the assistant and the type of assistant, because you touched on something that I think is really important that I think is undervalued. And I know there's only 30 of these jobs, but if you're a Micah Nori or you're Sean Sweeney and you're in a position where you can coach Anthony Edwards, you can coach Victor Wembanyama, you have teams that, they're going to be continuous contenders. You should not take a job, I'm sorry, like the Chicago Bulls. That's just not where your head should be at. You should take the exact right fit. Now, I can't tell them what that is. So if they feel that's the Bulls, I suppose. But they're just these coaches time and time again, they're like, I just take the first job that is offered to me. And it's like, no, you're in a higher tier than that. You use that leverage to take the exact right job, like the Magic job, or even like the Mavericks job. I think
Mhm.
if Sweeney got the Mavericks job, as much as I don't like that, for myself, that would be a great starting spot for him to have Cooper Flag and be able to build a defense around Cooper Flag, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say that those two have played themselves above a Bulls level job, but you just never know with these kind of things because it's what the person values, not what I value from my couch.
Right, for sure. We move on now, and this is going to be a fun one to talk through because the Milwaukee Bucks have a lot of decisions to make. Giannis Antetokounmpo, will he or will he not be traded? Will it or will it not come before the NBA draft? And then what do you do with the rest of this roster? You've already hamstrung yourself for years in advance, killing that Damian Lillard contract, putting that hit against your cap space. You've got the number 10 pick this year. They weren't able to tank as far down as they would have liked to because in part a dispute with Giannis over how much he was playing at the end of the year. Miles Turner just came in on this big contract. He's already talking after his first season about players in that locker room not being held accountable. Not a fan of how Doc Rivers ran things. It's just, and then you've got the contract of Kyle Kuzma that you, in a perfect world, would want to get off of. But part of why he's there is because they were getting off of a contract. So I don't know how you can then use assets again to get a guy off your books. I don't see a path to them building a roster that will keep Giannis there this offseason. And therefore, I think the inevitable writing is on the wall. Giannis Antetokounmpo will likely be traded. And I think if you're the Bucks, you do everything you can to get that done before the NBA draft.
Yeah, you're in a we have to get Giannis off this roster situation. Both sides, it's just clear that this has become toxic. But what this means for them is that they're basically before where the Bulls are. We just talked like 10, 15 minutes about where the Bulls are and how they can't really do anything. They're in a spot before that point because you have to tear the roster down to get to the point that the Bulls are at, and then you get to react and rebuild and try to replenish your pick cupboard. Because we know the Milwaukee's just done everything in their power to try to build a contender around Giannis, which in some ways is admirable, but in other ways it's just poor roster management because they just keep kicking this can down the road. Now they can't kick it down the road again and once again try to figure out what they can do to build around Giannis. No one would suggest that, but they can do it, and they'll continue to put themselves in this pre-Bulls phase because they will continue to not be an actual contender. They will maybe make the play in, maybe not make the play in. Giannis can only take a roster like that, but so far, especially as he ages. But it again, like I said, is the theme of this episode. It's just hard to know what to do with these rosters because they are not full. They are just poorly thought out rosters right now, and it's hard to find the movement for them to even make things like Milwaukee has a ton of free agents. They could get to cap space, but what would that really do for them? Because they can't get to
Right.
enough cap space to make a dent.
And that's where the Damian Lillard contract being written off the books is going to kill them. They can't go get anyone that requires cap space at this point. Giannis also due for an extension later in this offseason. And I think that's going to be such an interesting storyline. We might see that he gets traded during the finals before the draft and we can put this all behind us and we can start focusing on the future. I don't think that's nearly as interesting of a discussion at this point if you're a Bucks fan, just because at that point you draft for potential at 10, you draft for potential at whatever other pick you get in this year's draft. You kind of unload things. You see if there's a home for Miles Turner. We wipe our hands, we call it an off season, and we accept that next year is not going to be very fun. But hiring Taylor Jenkins as early in the process as they did was pretty interesting to me. The reason being that Taylor Jenkins, I feel like, is in that same class of coaches we were just talking about that is probably above a tanking level job. He did enough with the Memphis Grizzlies during his time that he didn't have to just jump on. In fact, he didn't. He took a year off from the coaching ranks. He went and consulted for a couple of teams. For him to jump right back in early in the process, take this Milwaukee job, to me, there were a couple of alarm bells that went off just saying, that feels like another one of these moves that they've continually made. It was Miles Turner the last offseason, continuing to give Bobby Portis contract extensions, all kinds of different moves that they've made. Damian Lillard coming in a trade before that, Drew Holiday before that. The Bucks are going to keep hedging this, I feel like, until the trade is complete, until all of the contracts and paperwork are signed. They're going to hedge and they're going to ask Giannis at each step of the way, did this make you happy? Do you like this? Has this convinced you? Do you want to sign a contract now? And yes, it has gotten really toxic with the statements put out by agents and owners and GMs and whoever is behind a microphone. It's clear that they're not on the same page, all of these parties. But there is a path for this Bucks team. And I'm going to throw you a surprise trade. I don't know if you have one to send back, but I'm going to throw you a surprise trade here. And it's a surprise, I feel like, because A Giannis trade's not a big surprise. Now we could get into a surprise about who he goes to or what comes back in the package. But the real surprise trade for me is that the Milwaukee Bucks look around, they say, we hired Taylor Jenkins. We're going to make one
No,
more push here to
no,
try to convince Giannis Antetokounmpo to stay.
I
Because
know
if
what you're
Giannis
doing.
leaves, who cares what's on the roster? And you package up a couple of bad contracts and a promising player like Ryan Rollins, who you don't have any use for if you're in full tank mode, anyways, and you send it to the Memphis Grizzlies, and you look over at Giannis and you say, hey, how about Ja Morant and Taylor Jenkins? Does that make you want to stay? And if it doesn't, you trade him. You trade Ja at the trade deadline, whatever you've got to do. But I think that it'd be a really Bucks move to make one last swing, knowing that you can get out of it, knowing that you can undo it at no real cost down the line. It's not like Ja's trade value is going to go down from where it is. It's not like they're going to miss out on any opportunity having kept Kyle Kuzma and Bobby Portis's numbers on the books. You're really just making one last swing with almost no downside to see if Giannis will sign that contract extension.
I don't even mind that. Um, if they it leads me to something that I wanted to talk about, but I'm going to talk about your trade first, obviously, which is if they can get that to happen, if they can make that happen without any significant risks for down the road, sure, see what happens. Maybe Giannis can have an effect on Ja's habits. I mean, we know that Ja is willing to put in the work. That was never the issue. It's just some of the other professionalism. The problem with that is that Giannis wasn't particularly professional this year. So who knows? It could be the blind leading the blind, but I think some of that is a little overblown at the same time as well. I think if Giannis believes that a team can win and is heading in the right direction, he'll do the things necessary to lead that team in the proper manner. I just don't think he felt like that's what was happening this year,
Yeah.
and so he kind of did his own thing. So I don't mind that. Again, it would just depend on what we're packaging and what we're putting in, and again, because of Jaw's value is where it's at, you're not going to have to do much to get that trade over the line. And I think it could benefit both parties. One thing that it illuminates, though, is like everyone's getting mad at Giannis, and I get some of that. Some of that is the will he won't. We kind of expect athletes to kind of do management's job for them these days and be like, hey, I want out. So do it. This is really a management issue. They don't have a direction for the franchise. They refuse to be the person who says, all right, this era is over. We're done with Giannis Antetokounmpo. He doesn't fit the timeline anymore. We're going to move on from him. That is a management job. And for whatever reason, we do not hold management to account for that kind of situation and how this situation is getting toxic. Like, yeah, Giannis can ask out. The Milwaukee Bucks can absolutely reset their franchise and stop being a slave to trying to build a team that they know they cannot build around Giannis. And they refuse to make that move. This would be again refusing to make that move.
So my counter to that would be, and it's not even like a true counter, just to the idea that they are being held as a slave to building it around Giannis. They really haven't until Giannis applies pressure. And I think that's where this rift has all come from. I think that that's what has put them in this position to where they're not going to keep their franchise star who would have loved to stay in that market forever if they had kept winning. They continued to draft project after project after project. And they not only did they not hit on them, but none of them were on the timeline that helped them win more championships after they got one over the line with that Drew Holiday trade. Each time that there has been a move made to appease Giannis, it has been direct because Giannis applied pressure. There was the Drew Holiday trade. He said, we have to go win a championship now. Fine, we'll trade for Drew Holiday. You look at the Damian Lillard. There was worry that Giannis was going to walk, so they trade for Damian Lillard. Miles Turner. We're terrified he's going to demand a trade, so we got to go get Miles Turner. They have repeatedly done their own thing as a front office, the way that they view roster building, gone and gotten these high upside, low floor players. And then when they don't fit in the timeline, Then they coddle to Giannis, who is making demands because they understand that they can't be the bad guy here. Otherwise, their jobs are on the line. And so it's two sides both trying not to be the bad guy, and it's made everyone look worse.
And it's kind of the worst of all worlds type of deal. It's a very similar, now that you've laid it out that way, and that's a good point. It's very similar to what happened, which with the first stint LeBron Cavs, which is in somewhat hindsight, like kind of glossed over just this level of dysfunction that was going on, which is a product of both sides trying to exert power, but without trying to exert power, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Which is LeBron was like, hey, I have put this running clock, this running timer on your ability to build this roster. So the Cavs kept making panic moves, and each successive panic move was worse than the last because they're like, we have to get over the line before LeBron leaves us or potentially leaves us. And LeBron did that very intentionally. And I understand why he did that, but it also makes it really hard to roster build. And so it's incumbent upon management to be flexible, but to be very, you have to have a vision.
Yeah.
And that's where these a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder excels. Like they love Shea, but they don't do things because Shea requests them. They say, "Hey, we're going to do this." They say, "Hey, Shea, what do you think about this?" They're partners with their players, but the player cannot be running the franchise because it's just a different perspective being on the court and being a long-term roster constructor. And right now, to your point, Milwaukee has never been a long-term roster constructor, which is why they continue to find themselves in situations that Giannis doesn't want to be in. If they were more like if they had a vision that they could sell to Giannis and be an actual vision, it would actually be more likely that he would want to stay in that vision than how they've currently been doing.
Right. The Indiana Pacers are another team here that we have to talk about in the Central Division. And, well, they already used up their trade asset going to get Ivica Zubac last season at the deadline. There was a chance that they would get to double dip there, that they would get Zubac, they would keep their pick, which was protected inside the top four. That doesn't happen. It lands at 5. The Clippers now have that pick. And the Pacers, who are 1 year removed from taking the Oklahoma City Thunder to game 7 of the finals, will get back Tyrese Halliburton. We'll now have Ivica Zubac in the place of Miles Turner, who was there for that finals run. Andrew Nimbard's still on the roster. So is Aaron Nesmith. Pascal Siakam continues to be a dominant player. They've really got that entire roster still there. They don't really have many free agents to speak of, not a lot of roster decisions, and no picks. So the Indiana Pacers might have a very boring offseason where we really get to the end and say the big win was getting Tyrese Halliburton back and having him in the fold once again for this group. Or they could take a swing, try to make something move. That feels less likely, though.
Frankly, there's nothing to talk about. I
No.
mean, frankly, their offseason's done. Their offseason move was trading for Zubac and hoping for the whatever percentage chance, the 50-50 coin flip that they would also get a top 4 pick. They didn't get it. They still have Zubac. There's really nothing. Like you said, there's no key free agents. There's really no specific hole in the roster. I'll just get it out the way because I don't think we should spend too much time on them. My surprise trade is just trying to find a replacement for that Mathurin archetype, which I did think was valuable for them. Come in, score, change the tenor of the game with athleticism. I was trying to figure out how to get Shaden Sharp on their team, but that didn't really make sense. Could they get like a DeMar DeRozan on their team? I'm not sure. The contracts just really don't align for that. So I ended up on McConnell plus Furphy for Monk, and I'm not sure that I love that trade, but it's just I'm trying to find that archetype. And realistically, they should get that archetype in free agency because there's plenty of people who can fit
Yes.
that kind in free agency. So they really shouldn't even do this via trade, but I had an assignment, so I
Yeah.
did it. But there's just besides filling that archetype, which they have enough money to do, there's just not a lot to say about the Indiana Pacers.
So that DeRozan one is actually interesting because you don't have to necessarily trade to do that. We don't know that he'll be on the market, but there's a buyout in that in that contract that which whatever team ends up waiving him, if they do, only has to pay him 10 million of that contract. So whether that's the Kings kind of hitting reset and going a different direction, or they trade him into some kind of exception or to another team that's looking to cut money, they save 15 million just by trading him in and then waiving him. However, that happens, if DeMar DeRozan hits the market, the Pacers are in a position to offer a very competitive rate with the MLE that they will have available to them. So if he wants a bigger deal, or who knows, maybe he's one of these veterans. We see it all the time. You come in on the minimum because you're just looking to be part of the best situation possible. You understand that that then means that the Pacers can go get a backup center with the MLE. I think there will be plenty of centers worth that on the market. We talk about Rob Williams. We talk about Mitchell Robinson potentially being a free agent on the market. I think if you could add Rob Williams to this group and a DeMar DeRozan, well, now we're talking about something that really gets you excited about with a healthy Tyrese Halliburton. Suddenly we can do something there. We can feel like we replaced and have improved on that team that pushed the Oklahoma City Thunder and make another run at winning the Eastern Conference this year.
Yeah, it's just a very well made roster. Getting Halliburton back will make all the difference. Just getting healthy in general will make all the difference for them. And I know that everyone like wants to get on Pritchard for his little statement and all that kind of stuff. But this is just, I know that the theme was these rosters have nothing to do. And that was true of the Pacers, but in a good way. The Pacers just don't have a lot of business to take care of. But this is a good thing because this is a team that could win the title and they've added to it and they've filled some holes and they can add even one more level to that. And that's what they should do. So not a lot of work to do for Pritchard unless he wants to make a splash move. But I just don't think that's what should happen. I
Yeah,
think he should trust the process and keep it going.
yeah, it doesn't feel like the offseason to do that for the Pacers. Now, if they had the number 5 pick, maybe there's some kind of deal out there, something like a Zubac trade that they already made, whatever the case is, but they've already taken care of their business. And so they'll probably sit on the sidelines. They'll make a couple of free agent signings that'll make us go, oh, all right, yeah, that'll put them back into the Eastern Conference race. But I don't think they're going to make a whole lot of headlines during this offseason. When we come back on the other side, we will finish things out with the Pistons and the Cavaliers, two teams that faced off in a conference semifinal. Now we find out what next moves they should make. Welcome back in as we continue walking through the Central Division in the Eastern Conference. It's time to talk about the Detroit Pistons, who were the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference this year, fell one step short of making it to the conference finals. But with Cade Cunningham, with Asar Thompson, with Isaiah Stewart, Jalen Duren, that group potentially back. We'll talk about what they need to do with their roster here in a moment. There's a lot of ways that they can go. They have the 21st pick in this year's draft. They have the ability to be a cap space team. Seems unlikely given the fact that Jalen Duren needs a new contract. If they want to bring back Tobias Harris, he will need a new deal. Those cap holds will stay on their books until they make a decision there. Asar Thompson also up for a contract extension this offseason. That one not as pressing, but still something that they're likely going to have to get done at some point during this process. Obviously, won't affect next year's books, but will impact their plan moving forward. Because I think as we talk about all these things that they need to do with the players currently on the roster, with the roster as it stands, the one thing that we for sure know they need to do if they want to go from where they were last year to the next step of being a finals contender is bringing a number 2 scoring option. And so, Derek, let's jump right to it. Do you have a surprise trade for me that brings them a number 2 scoring option?
In fact, I do. I have a Jamal Murray for Duncan Robinson, Ron Holland, Karis LeVert, and 2 picks. Trade for you to for your pleasure. I've brought them Jamal Murray.
Yeah, Jamal Murray is a really interesting one. We will, of course, talk about the Denver Nuggets at a later date, but that's a team that has some decisions to make. They have also free agents from their roster this upcoming offseason, and things haven't gone the right way. But do you move on from one of your 2 core pieces, the guy who's been the sidekick for Nikola Jokic? If I'm the Pistons, I think that I'm all in on it because it gives me a guy who, despite being listed as a point guard, in all functionality, plays more as a shooting guard because Nikola Jokic is on the floor. He's off the ball more than he is on it. He might bring the ball up and dribble it into the front or into the front court, but Nikola Jokic is the one making reads, averaging 10 assists a game, all that, which makes him a perfect secondary creator next to Cade Cunningham, in my opinion. We know he can play point guard, but he doesn't have to. He can be off the ball, he can float to that wing. Murray feels like a really ideal fit here. I like that trade a lot. I'm not concerned at all about the two picks. I think if you're Denver, you're definitely interested in adding a lot of depth to your group with the addition of Levert, with Holland. I can be talked into that trade. Definitely, if I'm the Pistons, I think if I'm the Nuggets is where I have to really decide: are we blowing this thing up, and what's that going to do to Nikola Jokic and his desire to be here long term?
Yeah, I think it's just a resetting of the books for Denver. I don't know that I don't know what Denver can do besides just hope that they can run it back and be healthy, and maybe they'll do that. They'll try that. I'm not sure that would be effective. So I think you have to get yourself into. It's kind of like what we discussed last week with the Lakers. It's not that you're not a true contender right now. Can you get to the place where you can be a contender in a year, 2 years? And you need to start that process as soon as possible. Obviously, we're not talking about Denver, so I'll shelve that conversation. But I'm just saying this isn't maybe the exact trade, but I think this is the framework for something that Denver would consider
Mhm.
um, to get Murray, to get off Murray, and then obviously for the Pistons, this is just what they need. The only thing to me that's more perfect than Jamal Murray for them would be if they could get Devin Booker. But we know based off how the Suns operate, Devin Booker is not available. So that would truly be a surprising trade if they could get Booker. That's why I didn't build anything around it because it's just I don't feel that that's functionally possible. But if for whatever reason Booker became available, that would be even a more perfect fit than Jamal Murray.
Yeah, I think we're somewhere on the continuum from Tyler Hero to Devin Booker with the Jamal Murray trade. And so I do like it. I think that it's going to be interesting to see what they decide to do this offseason because Duran making all NBA was almost a backbreaker for them, really. I mean, it couldn't have gone worse. If you're the Pistons and you didn't sign him to a deal last offseason, you said go out and prove it. Well, he proved it, got an all NBA nod, which makes him supermax eligible, but then in the
How,
playoffs, undid a lot of that by struggling.
how
So now
often are we going to say this?
you've
This
got to
this
make
whole
the
Supermax
impossible,
deal.
the impossible decision. You're not giving him the supermax. I think if he can get the supermax somewhere else, you tell him good luck. What we appreciate your time. I don't see that happening though. I do think they're going to be really uncomfortable with how much money they have to give him because we're going to creep towards 40 million. I think average annual value for a guy who just showed some real flaws in the playoffs. And during the regular season, he was great. I mean, he earned all NBA nods. I probably wouldn't have put him there, but he got the votes, made him super max eligible. I think what compounds the complexity of this deal, though, is that Asar Thompson also needs an extension. And you've really got to think forward looking here. Again, not looking at can we contend this year. You've got to look at the trajectory. You want to give yourself the most shots at winning an NBA title. Does that involve Jalen Duren and Asar Thompson, neither one of them spacing the floor for Cade Cunningham? Now, they do offer different things. Asar, of course, is the elite perimeter defender, all defensive level guy. Jalen Duren, a high level rebounder, great in the pick and roll with Cade Cunningham. But can you afford, by the time it's all said and done, to be spending potentially $75 million a year on those two guys? When you need, as we know, the goal of the offseason is to add a secondary scorer, a secondary playmaker, somebody who's going to command. All those guys that we just listed are somewhere between 35 and $55 million. That's the level of guy that you need to bring in. Suddenly, we're out of money and we've got four players because Cade is worth the max. Cade is worth the super max, the whatever name they come up with for the most money that he can get. He's worth it. So you're
And this
really in trouble with the rest of your roster build if you've got two guys making that much money who provide you value, but I'm not sure that they can return $75 million worth of value together, knowing that you need another player who's going to be big dollar between them to make it work.
this is a CBA issue. This is
Yes.
why me you do not like the current structure of the CBA, because it used to be you could pay Jalen during this and it might work, it might not work. It probably wasn't going to work, but you could get off it. You could aggregate the contracts to get the value needed to reset the deck. You can no longer do that, which makes it prohibitive to even enter into the agreement in the first place, even though you're still basically forced to enter into the agreement because even at this point, you still can't get enough value for Jalen Duren to make that point worth your while, especially with all the other teams dealing with this same situation. So this is what really makes roster building somewhat impossible in a way that I don't like. And the Pistons are kind of patient zero for this idea, because right now we're in a era of the NBA where you really cannot afford to pay a big of Jalen Duren's archetype, $40 million. But and why bigs can sometimes be overrated because of that portion of it,
Mm-hmm.
they are also underrated in the fact that, if these $10 million bigs, these $15 million bigs, they also aren't going to get you where you need to go if you're trying to be a true contender. You need to be in that 20, $30 million space, and we've kind of cut that out with this new CBA. And so that's the problem they're running into is if they pay Jalen Duren that amount of money, he's just simply not worth it, but they still need Jalen Duren on their team, and that is the problem that they have, and it's just an impossible solve. I honestly, besides just biting the bullet and seeing if you can construct a roster around it, there's really just nothing else they can do. I feel kind of, having talked it out, I feel kind of bad for Detroit. It's just
Yep.
that the players that they have that are valuable in their archetypes are just not where you don't want to pay them that kind of money, but it's all they have. They can't make them new players. So you're just going to have to kind of bet on yourself and hope for development. And maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. Try to fit in someone like a Murray before you get into this completely into this predicament, and ride it out that way. And hopefully the new CBA, when it comes up in a couple of years, will provide some avenue for relief for this situation, because this is the exact problem that everyone kind of foresaw with what they did with that CBA, and it's hurting a team that's actually done a lot of things the right way. Like obviously Detroit was in the mud for a little bit, but in terms of just building through the draft, building through making shrewd moves, shrewd free agent signings, shrewd trades, they've done everything the right way, and now they're getting boned by something they can't control.
Yeah. You should not be punished for hitting on draft picks and developing them into a really solid core. And that's what that's what's happening right now. You've developed three guys into players that are worth big contracts. None of them, I mean, Cade was a very high draft pick, but Duran was a guy in the teens. Asar Thompson was a guy in the lottery, yes, but not one of the top three guys who were raved about in that class. I mean, he wasn't even the most raved about brother in that draft class with them in. And there's no scenario where we should be sitting here a year in advance of him hitting his second contract, where a player that has achieved what Asar Thompson has should be debated as a trade chip. For a team that was just the number one seed in the conference, we realistically have to discuss whether they should move Asar Thompson. That should never happen. There's got to be something in the next CBA that addresses, yes, this second apron has done a couple of good things. It has stopped teams from just getting stupid with how they spend money. But it has made it so hard to spend money that we now can't pay players what we've agreed in that same CBA they should make. And
Well,
so
I'm
we're
just,
really hamstringing ourselves.
I'm just so tired of legislating for the people who can't build their rosters, because they're never going to be able to do it. So I'm just tired of legislating for it. Like I know that the owner's going to keep doing it because they're the ones most affected by it, and it's usually them making the mistakes, and they want to bulletproof their mistake process. But you can't do that, and you're gonna still make mistakes. And so all you've done is make a worse entertainment product. That's all you're doing, is making a worse entertainment product because the teams that do things the right way and get good can't stay good. You can't even build relationships with these players because they're so constantly moving. You're not the NFL. You're never going to be the NFL. Stop trying to be the NFL. You make your bones by building these rosters that people can fall in love with. The TMC, the Run TMC Warriors, they weren't a championship team. People love those. Warriors fans love those teams. And that's because they could build something, they could stay together. And even if they didn't get over the top, you fell in love with it. We can't do that anymore. And everyone blames player empowerment. No, a lot of this is legislated by these constant CBAs that one after the other make it harder and harder to build rosters.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think that this team, no matter which way they go long term, I hope that they run this out and they run down the clock to try to make a decision on whether or not they can play those two together. Because I think you got to bring back Duran. You got to probably get ahead of the Asar contract. Maybe they run it down the way that they did this Duran one and wait out the process. They can sign and trade if they need to at the end of the day. We'll see what they do, but I do think that this is the offseason where they've got to go get that secondary scorer, that secondary playmaker, and put him at the shooting guard spot. And they've got the contracts to do it. This is probably the last offseason they're going to have the contracts to be able to do it. And it's going to be interesting to see who they are able to go get. How much of an asset do you want to give up? Because you've got, again, this has been a very well-constructed team. If you want to put together a Ron Holland with an Isaiah Stewart, you've got the money with Duncan Robinson if you decide to go for somebody who's a higher salary player. They've got all the pieces they need to go get anyone they want on the board. But you're going to accelerate your clock by doing that. I think this is the time to do that. But again, the CBA has put them in a position that they're being punished for hitting on so many of these guys that really you look at this roster and most of the contribution is coming from, or even the asset pool that we're talking about is homegrown. So unfortunate that they're being impacted by the CBA this way, but this is the cards that they've been dealt. We will see what they end up doing. But yes, the goal is to go get somebody who is either a Jamal Murray. We kind of talked about that continuum, somewhere between Tyler Hero and Devin Booker. You want to land somebody who is in that realm between those two players to put next to Cade Cunningham moving forward if you're the Pistons. That brings us to the Cleveland Cavaliers, who made it to the conference final. It's really weird to me to discuss this team as making it as far as they ever have with this current iteration, because it also feels like they're closer to the end than ever after facing the Knicks in a sweep during the conference finals. So the Cleveland Cavaliers have a lot to get done this offseason. James Harden due for a new contract. Look, we'll get to that in a second. I'll talk more about that momentarily. Donovan Mitchell due for an extension coming up. Jarrett Allen is on the books. Evan Mobley continues to hit his new contract where you're going to pay him more and more. You've got key free agents in Keon Ellis, who you spent not a lot, but you spent some asset capital to bring into this roster. Dean Wade, who has been kind of a undersung cog of this whole thing, who I think is going to have quite a significant market out there in free agency. And the number 29 pick, which this is where you're going to pick if you are this good, if you make these kinds of runs. The Cavaliers have a lot to get done. They've got pieces to get something done, but I don't think it's clear to anyone what exactly they need to do, Derek.
Oh, they're a true second apron team. Which again, we talked about this last week when I had a hard time making the trade that I wanted to, because the trade that needed to happen was with them. So it was hard to make that trade. That happened again today because obviously they are now the center point of a trade that needs to be made. So it was hard to do it because they're in the second apron. They have all these decisions to make, the Harden contract, the Mitchell contract. They gave up assets to get Keon Ellis. He's an unrestricted free agent. They have Dean Wade, who's been in their system. He's an unrestricted free agent, as you're saying, and it's just hard to make the moves. They're also rumored to be in the LeBron James business. They've also started to have some rumors about that they want to be in the Giannis business. So it's just like it's hard to navigate because there's all these pieces that have to fall first before you can even think about what they'll do down the line. Because first they have to make that trade, then they got to get under the second apron. Then they have to make those trades, and if they make those trades, it just changes everything. Then they have to sign their people again. And we're saying all this for a team that wasn't like, yeah, they got to the conference finals, but they're not particularly close to winning it all. They're just not.
Yeah.
And so what is again, especially after just talking about Run TMC and people love those teams and blah blah blah. I don't want to make it seem like if you can't win the title, like there's no point. But at a certain point, when you're spending this much money and you can't win the title, there does become a certain point where it's like, well, why are we doing that?
Well, I think you've also stripped away some of the shine of the fan favorite part of this. The
With Darius
Darius
Garland
Garland trade for James Harden. Look, I'm not saying that Darius Garland was the fan favorite on that team, but you really sped up your timeline significantly. You brought in a player who's not everyone's favorite around the NBA. It's not, he has his fans for sure, but it's not like he's a universally beloved guy who's going to plug in there and really be part of the community and everyone's going to rally around it. That's just not who James Harden has been.
Well, he'll be a part of a certain community. You know what I mean?
Well, we'll see about that. But the point being, you didn't make your team more likable, more lovable when you made the move for James Harden to try to go all in and push your chips to the middle of the table. And so now the goal is winning. That is the end goal here. That has to be the final stage that you're looking to hit. You also, like I said, Harden's contract coming up. Mitchell needs an extension. And so that leaves the bigs, who are tertiary pieces in this, really vulnerable to be on the chopping block. We've got the Giannis trade that's up in the air here. Yes, they're going to be mentioned for it. I know that Evan Mobley is an incredible basketball player, former defensive player of the year, all that. I don't think he's better than a second option on a title contender. I think he's most likely a third option on a true title contender because he's not a ball in hand guy. He's not a true shooter from the corner. And so, yes, there's been some talk about, well, what happens if you move him to the to the 5 instead of the 4? Does that improve his value? I don't think so, because we just got done talking about with other teams that the center position, while it is valuable, there's kind of a cap on how much value it can provide. So I'm unsure that Evan Mobley, because that's about all the asset pool they can give up. I mean, they can give up some future picks, but everyone has that available. I don't know how you get there value-wise to have the best offer on the table, especially knowing that Giannis is not going to make that his first choice of where he lands to play with James Harden and Donovan Mitchell for 1-2 years, however long that ends up.
Yeah, I think we have to stop thinking about Evan Mobley in this theoretical ceiling that it's not impossible that he could still get there, but every year that passes, it becomes less and less likely that he will actually get there. I was thinking about this the other day, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it's just not what we're here to do. But all the people that we've decided could possibly be Tim Duncan have all failed in a way to ever get anywhere close. It's not even that, because being Tim Duncan in this era is really hard. But it's not even that they're not Tim Duncan. It's that they're not even close to whatever Tim Duncan accomplished. And Evan Mobley has fallen into that trap once more, where I actually do think you should probably move him to the 5. I think he has his most value there as a rim protector who can stretch the floor, and then let him grow into that, somewhat of a mini Wembanyama type of a situation there. And then that opens up your ability to build around him, because you're no longer trying to fit Jared Allen around him. You're no longer trying to do double bigs. You have the flexibility to go up or go down. You can still play him at the 4 if you need to, but you don't. That's not what you're building your roster around. So my surprise trade was I moved Jared Allen. This trade is impossible because they're second aprons, so it can't happen. but it's the best I could do. I traded Jared Allen for Aaron Gordon because I think that's the type of player that they need. They need someone who could be a four, do the dirty work, be a defender, still provide some ball handling and versatility. But it's just, everything that Jared Allen isn't. That's pretty much what they need for that spot. Again, that trade cannot happen right now, but that is where I went with the surprise trade.
Nothing is impossible
Oh,
because they can aggregate a contract before that in a separate deal and still be able to get that deal done. So, not completely off the table, but it would take you moving Max Struess into somebody's trade exception for basically zero return. Maybe you get a little bit of pick capital back for him. That would then set you up to be able to make that trade. I agree that there would be some real value there, provided, again, that Aaron Gordon would be able to get back healthy and reach kind of the peak that we've seen him before. I do also think that in that scenario, we're talking about a three-team trade, clearly, because Jared Allen next to Nikola Jokic doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if there's somebody out there that the Nuggets do like, and they could get a three-team trade structured that way, I could see it. I think that that would be an interesting way for them to kind of clear this log jam. But again, you're going to have to give up more value than you need to because you've got to clear the money to get the deal done first, which means you're never going to get the full value for Max Struess that you're going to want or need to make this roster the best that it can be moving forward. That's unfortunately where they find themselves with this. Now I'm going to do the James Harden thing. I'm going to address it. Yes, he has not. Oh yeah.
before you do the James Harden, I just want to say I'm sorry, Jared Allen. You're a fellow Longhorn. I keep trading you, and I'm sorry. If you want to be in Cleveland, I'm so sorry, but it's just what has to happen. And I'm sorry that I keep trading you. Hook 'em.
So this is the James Harden thing. We're going to do it. We're going to talk about how he has never really had postseason success. He has never been able to lead his team to the promised land. But that's not really what I'm going to focus on here, because more important than whether or not he can lead you to the NBA finals and be the best player or even the second best player on a title contending team, I want to talk about how his agents have mastered movement across the NBA. This is a complete masterclass, their ability to identify when and how he needs to get out of situations while structuring each of his contracts to where, sure, a team could just leave him. They could get off the deal, but they're not going to. They're always going to offer the extension that he wants, because you can't, in this NBA climate, with the aprons, with the way that free agency is used, the inability to sign players above a certain number without cap space, you cannot lose someone who provides the value at the number James Harden does for no value. You can't let him walk. You have to either trade him to somewhere that is going to sign him to an extension or give him the extension. Those are the only two options in this current NBA climate. His agency has mastered this CBA. They have used it multiple times to get him from one spot to the next, get him a new contract, and set him up to do it year after year and really decide where he wants to play, who he wants to play with, without having the ability to take a team to the promised land, without being able to be a go-to guy late in the playoffs. They have absolutely hit a home run, and I can't even be mad at it.
So what you're saying is that James Harden is the ultimate NBA mercenary. E- e-
At this
Everyone thinks
point,
it's
yes.
Kevin Durant, but it's actually James Harden who is the ultimate NBA mercenary.
At this point, yes. I think that people view the KD mercenary impact a little bit differently because he has gotten teams to the promised land, even though not recently. Recently, it's looked a lot like what James Harden is doing, where it's you understand that you can't just lose me for nothing. So you're going to trade me to somewhere else that I would rather be. They've taken very similar paths in these last few years. But James Harden has, even with everyone across the league agreeing that he's not the guy you want to be your go-to guy down the stretch of a playoff game, nobody's disputing that. Nobody is arguing, well, actually, James Harden is the guy that we want to, you know, put everything on. But they keep
Who
doing it because they can't just lose him for nothing. That's a worse option. That takes you out of playoff contention, where he at least gets you to that point, and you convince yourself because you have to, because he's on the books. We're gonna at least have a really good player and put him in a scenario, and maybe our other guy, maybe Donovan Mitchell, can step up in that moment when we need him to.
I have two questions for you. First question, I'm going to Bill Simmons a little bit here. Who is the greatest mercenary of all time? Who is the best player who is of mercenary abilities of all time? Because I don't think it's James Harden. I think it's Shaq. But who do you think?
That's the first name that came to mind was Shaquille O'Neal because of the classic rainbow of jerseys that we see displayed where he really did bounce around. Now that was functionally later in his career even than James Harden. Obviously not all of it. He did bounce around throughout his career, but the string of playing for whatever it was, 4 or 5 teams in a 4 or 5 year span, that was Shaq is basically a backup center at this point, but he's Shaquille O'Neal. We're going to keep giving him contracts. James Harden is still able to get you deep into the playoffs. He's just not going to get you past the second round or the third, whatever it is.
I think the elements that we're touching on here that make an NBA mercenary are a couple of things. I think the first thing is you have to leave your team, your first team, before the second contract, because that makes you feel like a mercenary to a certain extent. Yeah. If you are on a good team and you leave them, they both did that for different reasons, and then you have to be so good that you can be in this debate. So that means you have to stay at that second location, maybe even win a couple of titles, 3 if you're Shaq, none if you're Harden. And then after that, you have to be of such a caliber of player that you are good, but you are also maybe an underachiever. Both Shaq and Harden fit that mold, so that you will now then go at a certain point in your career from place to place to place, because you can't, if you're too good, they're going to want to keep you. So you can't be that good at that point. So it's an interesting discussion. I think
there's one more name out there that's the underrated option that nobody's going to bring up because he's not the star on the team, but he chased some titles and he got them. Robert Horry.
Oh, Bob. I wouldn't think of it that way, but that's a good point. Although he was traded a lot. I feel like a role player by just that by the osmosis that they're not in control a lot of times of where they go to a certain extent. I feel like that kind of takes the mercenary label off them to a certain extent. Because to me, a mercenary, like, this is just me making it up, making a rule. A mercenary to me feels like intentional. Like you have to be doing it yourself.
I was not alive during Robert Horry's part of his run, and I definitely wasn't watching the NBA during pretty much all of his NBA tenure. But I would ask those who did witness it and were watching and were engaged in it, was he that level of role player though, to where he had some control? Maybe he wasn't calling the shots, but he knew that if he called his star player friends on certain rosters, they would demand, you better get this guy. He wants to come.
All right. Well, we got to do this quick, but here,
we got to wrap up the show here.
We got to do this quick, but here's the deal, because I do know the timeline on this. He's only been on 3 teams, excuse me. And so he wanted to be in Houston. He got traded in Houston when they went star chasing, and so he ended up in Phoenix. So it was 4 teams. Mm-hmm. He had a feud with Danny Ainge, and Danny Ainge and him got in like a massive fight. And that's what got him traded to the Lakers when the Lakers hadn't ascended yet. Then he spent a long time with the Lakers, obviously very key piece. And then the Lakers kind of decided they didn't want him anymore because they could get Karl Malone. And that's when he went to the Spurs. He finished his career with the Spurs. So the only really time that he had a choice to where to go was when he left the Lakers for the Spurs. And I just straight up don't remember that free agency class. So I don't know what his options were, but again, he didn't have too much of a level of control in those situations.
Well, that was a nice detour to end today's episode. Thanks once again, Derek, for coming on. We will continue to break down these divisions across the NBA right here on 3 True Values Big Board.